Glad to know you're still with us. Now, Donald Trump's latest move to keep countries anchored to the US dollar has sparked debate. He's warning BRICS nations that they will face 100% tariffs if they create a rival currency. While the greenback remains unparalleled in liquidity and trust, analysts fear that Trump's aggressive stance risks pushing emerging economies further toward alternatives, including local currencies and potential BRICS-specific financial frameworks. Well, let's dive into the implications and what it means for the future of the dollar. Joining me for this are Dr. Hippolyte Fofack, former Chief Economist, Afreximbank. Thank you so much for joining me today, Doctor.
Pleasure is mine. Thank you for running such an important session. Absolutely.
And I also have right here with me Kehinde Jones, Head Research and Strategy, Anchoria Securities Limited. Thank you, Kehinde, for joining me.
Thanks so much.
All right, so Kehinde, I'd like to begin by asking you this. Some persons have actually described the emerging nations' idea of setting up their own currency as hot air. What do you make of that? Do you share the same sentiment?
From my own view of point, there are a lot of conspiracy about the BRICS. The Brazil, the Russia, the India, the China, the South Africa, they've all come together to say that the US reliance of currency have to stop. So looking back to when the world global currency started using US dollar in 1944, where we had so many countries pegging their currency to US dollar after the World War II. So it came in existence where the local currency and the regional currency has to come in.
All right. Okay, so I'm just wondering, do you think it's hot air? Like you're just talking, you can't make this happen. It's not possible for you to have your regional currency.
Everything's possible. It's possible if the challenges that we have in the global space, if the BRICS put financial infrastructure in place, the global system is in place, if there is trade and investment increase. If you look at Nigeria foreign capital inflow, in the last 2 months, it has increased about 183%, from 439 million to about 1.7 trillion. So this is something that even Nigeria is benefiting from this BRICS economy. So it's possible if the political interest and the financial instability in the global space is taken away. These challenges have to reduce in order for this to work out.
All right, thank you. Well, Doctor, let me come to you. There are those who probably do not know how the world got here and why the US dollar is the currency of trade. I'd like you to give us a bit of background around that in maybe, 1 minute or less.
In fact, if you allow me, before I get to your question, I'd like to add something to the first part of discussions, essentially, on the fact that people are skeptical when it comes to the idea of creating the BRIC currency. It's important to stress that when they started the euro in the 80s under Jacques Delors, the most consequential president of the European Commission, there was a lot of skepticism as well. But today, if you look at the data, and the euro accounts for almost 20% of official foreign exchange reserve held by central bank, 20%. It's quite significant. So it's become really an important part of the global financial architecture and taking away a lot from the US dollars. It is true that establishing a single currency like the euro for BRICS nations, which are very different at a different stage of economic development, can be a challenge. It will involve moving toward conversion toward macroeconomic criteria, agreeing on exchange rate mechanism, and more. But my view is that in the new era, where digitalization is actually cutting down transaction costs, increasing efficiency, there are a lot which can be done without going through the same mechanic and challenge that Europeans went through almost 30, 40 years ago. But to come back to your questions, I think it is important to stress that the world has actually changed a lot. And if you look at what has happened over the last month, actually, with Trump threatening, and the history of international finance, which was asking me to actually summarize in 1 minute. It's actually all started, as I said earlier, back in the 1940s, when after World War II, the US essentially became the only surplus nation in the world. On the debt capacity, they actually gave loan, including Marshall Plan, to European countries, which in return used those dollars to import manufactured goods from the US, essentially dollarizing European countries and maybe even Japan to a certain extent. And that works very well, as Keynes predicted back in the Bretton Woods Conference, that as long as the US would be the surplus nation, that would work. But the moment the US had been a surplus nation back in 1971, it became difficult. So what happened is, by delinking the US dollar from gold in the Nixon administration in August 1971, it enabled the US to continue to actually run its fiscal deficit, trade deficit, sustain its standards of living at much lower interest rates. And that's what the challenge that we have today, almost 40 years later, is that it's not just the US not being the largest surplus nation in the world, it's become the deficit nations, but digitalization and technology diffusion has enabled countries in the rest of the world, specifically in the global south, to play a more important role. In other words, we've seen multilateral transition in the trade and economic space.
All right.
And the challenge is actually to achieve that convergence.
All right, I guess there's a lot to talk about this, but of course, I would like to bring this here. Earlier, I asked Drs. Arauz and Kaboub to share their thoughts with me, and this was what they had to say. I'd like you to listen to this, especially the first one from Dr. Arauz.
Currently, there is no actual concerted effort on behalf of BRICS countries as a whole to come up with a different currency or an alternative currency. What you have is different initiatives from different BRICS member countries. For example, China is promoting the internationalization of the renminbi and its banking system through the China payment system. On the other hand, we have Brazil promoting a regional unit of account for trade within the South American region. On the other hand, you have Russia engaging in exchanges and barter to avoid sanctions from European and United States financial institutions. So as a whole, it may seem like there is an actual alternative, but in reality, it's just individual initiatives. Now, what we may find that countries in the BRICS community as a whole try to promote is a reform to an already existing international currency, which is the special drawing right, which is issued by the International Monetary Fund, and which you can find quoted in the international markets as XDR. I think Trump has gone a little bit too far ahead by making it visible the fact that BRICS countries have perhaps the intent to diversify the economy a little bit away from an international hegemon, that they have been critical not only of the dollar per se, but of the prime importance that US megabanks, payment systems, remittance companies have in the international financial market. So I think the US dollar is not actually under threat, so it won't be necessary for Trump to go forward with his threats. But I think that the United States has once again demonstrated the key importance that they give to the United States currency and its financial system to be part of, at the center of the international financial system.
All right, so I'd like you to respond to that. What do you make of what he just said?
If you look at the global economy, like I made mention of, you see that most of foreign reserve of other countries, even the BRICS foreign reserve, the currency is domiciled in USD. So Trump saying that there's a threat. I don't feel it's a threat. It's just a warning that if you move from my currency to another currency, that means there will be a global economic distortion.
But so, why should he be warning other countries? I understand geopolitics and all of those things, but to the layman, you're wondering, so why should he be warning other countries?
There's something in America called America First. So if you look at Trump election manifesto, you will see that he always use the word America First. And if you do a little research about America First, it means that anything we're doing in our monetary policy or fiscal policy, America has to come in first as a country. So he always go against Because if you look at the global space, since 2019, 2020, you will see that the global economy have been having a lot of issues. Increase in inflation rates, increase in NPL, and you will notice that now that Trump is doing this threat that is pushing back all these countries, you will see that there will be a supply chain shift, especially in Africa. Because a lot of African countries now, our leaders, especially political interests, we don't know where we sit right now. We will now move to, okay, let me join the BRICS, or let me be as an African country. Now, in this space of time, in the short run, there won't be an effect. But in the long run, if this threat continues, this threat persistence, you will see that in the long run, there will be a shift of our currency, especially if each country apart from US, adopt digital currency. Digital currency is getting in a space where a lot of countries want to adopt it, where you can transact without physical paper note. You see the green paper, you see the American note, where you have to transact in USD. And if you go back to the history of where US dollar was pegged, using for trade and investment purposes, you see that a lot of countries adopt it in 1971 as the foreign reserve currency. So you can notice that when a country wants to borrow funds, you will see that they're using USD as a benchmark, as a currency benchmark to borrow this fund.
All right, so I'll say this. I want us to remind ourselves that dollars accounted for about 88% of all trades in the $7.5 trillion a day foreign exchange market. That's based on the latest, triennial survey from Bank for International Settlements. Now, the size and strength of the U.S. economy is also unparalleled, and the greenback is still ultimate beneficiary of safe havens or haven flows. Now, can any group of countries undermine these numbers?
If you look at what has been happening in the BRICS economy, where there's a lot of political instability, different of political interests in each country. Now, what BRICS are standing on is that they can come together. Look at China. A lot of commodities is coming from China market. Look at commodity market. When you talk about oil price now, if you don't mention China or Russia, you are not talking about the oil price commodity. So now we can stand. The country can stand against this threat, as we mentioned of. But I don't see for the short run. I don't see any advantage. You want to pull it unless there's financial infrastructure, proper financial infrastructure or framework. Actually. Let me use that word, framework. Yeah. So if there's a framework that is suitable, not a framework of because a lot of countries will have trust issue. They will have consistency. A lot of things have to be put in place before you say that you want to move from a currency that is over-reliance in the market.
It's a currency of lending.
It's a currency of lending.
So many commodities are priced in dollars.
Yes. So the major issue about US dollar now is that you notice that other currency, even the local currency or regional currency, are depreciating against the USD. So a lot of BRICS countries, Brazil, Russia, India, China, and South Africa are having issue. And I go back to the data that came out this month, last 2 months in October, about 183% from foreign capital inflow came into Nigeria from all these BRICS countries. And if you look at it, our GDP stand around 3.46. This inflation started at 3.38.
I have to engage the doctor here. Yeah. Well, doctor, I believe you saw that particular that video from Dr. Arouse, and I would like you to add to that a quote from Dr. Fadel Kaboub. He said, "My position has always been that we cannot de-dollarize a system that has not been structurally decolonized yet, and that no new multipolar world can be born without Africa and the rest of the global south being repositioned away from the bottom of the global hierarchy and at the center of a new international economic order." I'd like to get your reaction to that particular statement.
I think it's very important to stress that even though there are what is called a heavy tendency, it's quite clear that we've seen the process of de-dollarization is unfolding. Just look at the data set. I think about 20 years ago, more than 72% of foreign exchange reserve were held in US dollar. It has fallen down to about 59%, and that's really an irreversible decline. And another important indicator that I would like to stress is that for many years, if not decades, most of trading in oil was in US dollar. And now we know that more than 65% of trading within the BRICS countries this year was in non-dollar currency. So the dollarization is actually happening, but it will be a gradual process, as we know. What has also happened is that the process of de-dollarization is not just driven by the need to actually mitigate the risk of weaponization the US dollar. They've also very much driven by potential benefit or the direct benefit that the country derive from such a process. And we've seen an increase in the use of local currency trading between India and Russia, for instance, whereby the Indian Central Bank, the Reserve Bank of India, estimate that they're having a saving of more than $30 billion a year. In other words, they see reductions in the balance of payment constraint associated with US dollars. Other countries are actually following suit, moving toward increasing use of local currency for cross-border trade and settlement. We see that within the ASEAN nations, and we see that within the BRICS nations. We see that increasingly between, let's say, China and countries in the Middle East for oil trading, in part driven by the fact that essentially China has become the largest trading nation in the world, and both for manufactured goods, but also a great importer in the commodity space. And along the same line, we saw France actually this month moving toward using a non-US dollar currency for trading, supporting essentially the petro yuan, the rise of the petro yuan. So we see a crack within the OECD country, the G7 countries. So it is reflections of the benefit, the huge benefit associated with the use of local currency settlement for trade.
Right. Before I let you go, I mean, Trump plans to levy a 100% tariff on BRICS. That's like the crux of the conversation today, if they consider ditching the dollar. Now, in the event that both parties decide to suit themselves, what could be the consequence of this?
I think the tariff have become the centerpiece of President Trump's economic policy. And in the tariff, he sees as a driver for growth. The tariff for Trump are also very important as a means for supporting employment. You saw that jobs growth, especially in the northeastern regions, which have been very much victim of globalizations. Tariff are also a means for him to boost revenue, especially to compensate potential losses with tax cuts. But it's a very important risk. It's a risky move if you were actually to push that far enough, in the sense that if you look at it objectively, by implementing tariff, you're essentially increasing the cost of import, and which has the tendency to be inflationary. That's the first risk. The second risk that we see at the global level is that it will essentially create some havoc in supply chain, global supply chains, which will actually accelerate the process of fragmentation of the global economy, which also comes with tremendous cost for global trade. But what I see in terms of direct implication is that the movement that I mentioned, in other words, the potential benefit that we see by moving toward local currency set for cross-border trade are far more important and superior to the potential cost of tariff. Another risk that we see for the US administration is that, as we mentioned earlier, the global south, essentially, if you look at the BRICS alone, they account for more than 35% of global GDP today. In other words, China has become the global manufacturing hub. So it's very difficult to actually implement sanctions or tariff when you rely heavily on the rest of the world for import of manufactured goods, the critical good. The cell phone that we use in Washington, the US today, are essentially imported from the rest of the world. And this is one of the most important commodities.
But
And the
you
same
know,
can be
Doctor,
said
we're beginning
for other
to
manufactured
see the trade war between these two countries, even before Trump comes in. We're beginning to see trade war between them, tariffs on chips and all of those. Where will all of this take us at the end of the day, really? Who's going to benefit from it?
In fact, I think what you also see as a response to that trade war, effort by a country in the global south, BRICS country, in other words, expand trade among themselves. And that's one way to actually mitigating the risk weaponization of the US dollars and the trade sanctions. And we've seen a dramatic increase in trade between the BRICS countries, which grew by more than 70% just over the last year. And we see a lot of that growing, that growth continuing. Another important aspect has been trade diversion. In other words, you move your manufactured goods and assemble them in countries which are not victim of tariff, and then export them into the US. And that's also been happening specifically between China and Mexico, for instance, with China establishing EV vehicle. And we can see a lot of that also happening within the African space as a way to mitigating the tariff, the US tariff.
Doctor, I'd like Kehinde to come in here. So Kehinde, talk to us. I mean, you heard what Doctor said. You know the question. So.
Yes, I agree with what Doctor said. If you look at what will happen, the implication will happen in terms of if the increase in this tariff, you will see that there will be a shift in supply chain, especially in consumer sector.
How would this affect Africa?
Now, yes, it will affect Africa in a big way. You look at what we are trying to produce, our import and our export. Most of what we are producing is going outside, and we are trying to earn more in foreign currency. But if you now look at what we are trying to import, our importation is quite high. Looking at South Africa, looking at other countries, like especially Nigeria, for example, our export is quite going high. There's increase in export than import. There's a balance of issue of balance of trade in our economy, majorly in sub-Saharan Africa. So I believe the implication of this is that we will see decline balance of payment. We will see decline in our foreign reserve, especially that we can earn more in foreign currency, USD. And you see financial instability, economic stability, and especially global inflation, especially in Africa, where we over-dependent on USD. And I believe the impact that this tariff will have on US also is the manufacturing sector. A lot of the manufacturing sector is quite huge in the US industry. And you see that most of what they are moving out from US is going to other countries, also this BRICS country, Brazil, China,
and
other
so
countries.
Tit for tat.
Tit for tat. And you see, yes, everybody will have, each country will have advantage and disadvantage.
All right, I think we have to close this now. All right, thank you so much for your thoughts. Doctor, thank you so much, Dr. Hippolyte Fofack, former Chief Economist, Afreximbank, Development Economist also. Thank you so much for your thoughts on the show today.
Pleasure. Thank you very much.
All right, Kehinde Jones, Head Research and Strategy, Anchoria Securities Limited. Thank you for your time.
Thank you.